Okay, this is the sickening case of a friendly neighbor. Um, as always, original link is down below, as well as the buttons that I am sure you understand and can use however you see fit. Um, please go and check out their channel. They've got some really interesting stuff. I saw this one and well, let's just say it looks like it's going to be interesting. So here we go. Oh, let me turn off my heat just so it doesn't make that all that background noise. We'll trust that it's off proper. But anywho, here we go. Let's see some screw up in this.
A good father, a loving husband, a friendly neighbor, and a devoted churchgoer. That is exactly how Dennis Rader's family and friends would have described him before finding out the terrifying truth. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we look into the case of Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK Killer. We have covered a number of stomach-churning killers during our time on YouTube, and Dennis Rader is up there with the worst. I don't want to give you any spoilers to what you will learn about in this video, but the nickname BTK Killer originates from his self-proclaimed MO: bind, torture, and kill.
Oh yeah, we're already starting off with this is lovely.
Dennis Rader was born on March 9th, 1945, and was the oldest of 4 brothers. Growing up in Wichita, Kansas, Rader had a very average childhood, although he did admit that he'd strangled cats and dogs just for fun whilst being very young. As a teenager, he became obsessed with local girls and began spying on them through bedroom windows. Rader even stole women's underwear off washing lines or wherever else he could get them. At the age of 21, Rader joined the U.S. Air Force, where he spent the next 4 years working as a mechanic, including long periods being stationed overseas. When he returned to Wichita, he married Paula Dietz, with whom he had 2 children with, a boy named Brian and a girl called Kate.
It's weird that at the beginning with that same pic, they blurred her face, but in the main portion of it, they didn't. I mean, there's not really a point when you're talking about, who he is and his wife is, and, I'm not saying that they should. It's just a weird doing both. But, yeah, it's not like nobody's gonna know who's being talked about here. So.
With whom he had 2 children with, a boy named Brian and a girl called Carrie. To take care of his family during the early 70s, Rader took a job on an assembly line at the Coleman Company in Wichita. Although this may sound like an average white picket fence American life, things were about to take a gruesome turn when Rader met another employee at Coleman, a 33-year-old mother of 5 named Julie Otero. Rader became obsessed with Julie Otero and began stalking her and would even spy on her family. If that wasn't sick enough, Rader became infatuated with Otero's 11-year-old daughter, Josephine. After weeks of quietly watching, his urge to get closer to the family got too much, and on the morning of January 15th, 1974, he forced his way inside their family home. Upon entering, he was surprised to see Julie's husband, Joseph, and their 9-year-old son, Joseph Jr., were also home. Rader, who had armed himself with a gun, held the family at gunpoint and proceeded to tie them up and strangle them to death, one by one. After killing Julie and Joseph, Rader strangled their son. Finally, he took Josephine down to the basement of the house and pulled down her pants and underwear before hanging her. After the poor girl took her last breath, the monster pleasured himself before leaving the scene with Joseph's wristwatch and a radio. 2.5 months later, the man everyone considered Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah, they weren't kidding. And yeah, trophies. Cool.
Two and a half months later, the man everyone considered Mr. Nice Guy felt the urge to act upon his twisted lust once again. This time his target was Catherine Bright, a 21-year-old who also worked at the Coleman plant. According to a later confession, Rader used to watch the girl going into her house and one day decided that she would become one of his projects, or PJs, as he liked to call them. On April 4th, 1974, Rader broke into Catherine's home while she was out and calmly waited for her to return. She did eventually come home, but once again, to the surprise of Rader, the woman wasn't alone, returning with her brother Kevin. While holding a gun at the pair, the killer got the two victims to tie each other up. Not the type of people who would go down without a fight. The siblings tried to fight back, but Kevin was shot in the process. Miraculously, the scuffle allowed Kevin to escape and survive the ordeal. Catherine, however, wasn't so lucky and was stabbed 11 times in the torso and back while trying with all her might to fight back against this creep. Although detectives later described the woman as fighting like a hellcat, she lost her life that night. In October 1974, Don Granger, who worked at the Wichita Eagle newspaper, received a strange phone call telling him there was a letter hidden inside a mechanical engineering textbook at the Wichita Public Library that he would be interested in. On investigation, the poorly written note was discovered, which described the Arturo killings in great detail. Rader wrote, "When this monster enter my brain, I will never know, but it's here to stay." Also writing, "The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. You see, he at it again. They will be on the next victim." He eventually signed the note off with, "Yours truly guiltily." The newspaper gave the letter to the Wichita Police Department, who kept it secret for months, as to not scare the public or give the writer the satisfaction. Kathy Hankel, a reporter for the rival Wichita Sun newspaper, later received a copy of the letter from an unnamed source and decided to make it public, writing an article stating that there was a serial killer on the loose.
You would think, I mean, you wouldn't want to give specifics, because yeah. But warning people that there's a serial killer on the loose, as it phrases it, this might be important news for the average person in the area to be aware of. Like I said, don't print the letter or, give specifics that might encourage any attention seeking of the person, but because you obviously want to be known. But you could let people in the area know that shit's going down, so to speak.
Decided to make it public, writing an article stating that there was a serial killer on the loose. In a streak of irony, at the same time the public were all fearing that a serial killer was nearby, Rader had landed himself a job installing alarm systems with the ADT security service. To make things worse, the only reason Rader got a job in the first place was because people were panicking that there was a killer breaking into houses and that they wanted to be protected. For several years, Rader went silent, somehow managing to suppress his urges. That was until 1977. when he struck twice. On March 17, 1977, he broke into the home of Shirley Vian. He overpowered her, tied her up, put a plastic bag over her head, and then strangled her to death with a rope. Her 3 young children were at home at the time, and out of sheer terror, had locked themselves in the bathroom. Rader later admitted that he wanted to kill them next, but after Vian's phone began ringing, he got scared and left the house. Just think about how traumatizing this event would have been for those poor children. On December 8, 1977, the BTK killer broke into the apartment of 25-year-old Nancy Fox. He cut her phone lines, made sure she wasn't home, and waited for her to return from work. After confronting her, he handcuffed her and strangled her with a belt. Once he knew she was dead, he once again pleasured himself before stealing Nancy's driver's license as a sick memento. After the infamy he had gotten from the note published in the newspaper, Rader began enjoying the brazen admission of his crimes.
Oh, so they did print the actual letter. Oh, that's not good.
In the newspaper, Rader began enjoying the brazen admission of his crimes, even ringing the police to report the murder from a payphone. In February 1978, he sent a 2-page letter to the Kate TV, sharing the gruesome details of the Shirley Vian and Nancy Fox murders. After this, Dennis Rader wouldn't kill again for 7 long years. During that time, he kept himself busy, earning a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Wichita State University. Yep, this sick serial killer studied law and got a degree. During this time, Rader became an active member of Wichita's Christ Lutheran Church and even became president of the congregation's council. Carrie Rawson, Rader's daughter, described him as a great father, even finding time to be a scout leader at his son's Boy Scout group. At this point in his life, he was respected by his friends, neighbors, and family. But something was missing. Something that he just couldn't shake. The need to kill. Only this time, his apple pie church-going life and his perverted urges were about to clash in the most disturbing way. Dennis Rader restarted his evil ways on April 27, 1985, when he began obsessing over an older woman, Maureen Hedge, who lived on the same street as the Rader family. In his usual style, he broke into Maureen's home and hid until she returned home with her boyfriend. This time, however, he waited for the boyfriend to leave and for Maureen to get tucked up into bed before he lunged from the darkness and strangled her to death with his bare hands. Unsatisfied with just taking the life of the woman, he then carried her naked body to the Christ Lutheran Church, where he posed her in a number of bondage positions around the church and took photographs. Absolutely horrifying. After he was done, he...
Wow. That's, I mean, and it's a weird phrase to be saying. Putting aside the photography, the moving of the body to do it is a risk in itself. And then, of course, the possibility of getting caught while taking these photos. Jesus. Daring.
And took photographs. Absolutely horrifying. After he was done, he dug a shallow ditch and rolled the body inside of it before burying the body. They say that old dogs can't learn new tricks, but in September 1986, Rader changed up his whole methodology and dressed up as a telephone repairman to knock on the door of his next victim, Vicki Wegerle. As soon as she let him into the home, he aimed his gun at her. With Vicky's 2-year-old son also in the house, the woman fought back when Raider tried to tie her up. Sadly, the monster overpowered her and managed to choke her with a pair of nylon stockings. He then took photographs of her body before driving away with her car. As he did drive away, Bill Wurgler, Vicky's husband, was returning home on the opposite side of the road and locked eyes with the stranger driving his wife's car. However, this wouldn't save the 10th and final victim of the BTK killer, who was 62-year-old Dolores E. Davis. Raider was actually on a Boy Scout camping trip on January 19, 1991, when he realized he had forgotten something at home. En route to his home, however, this vile killer took a detour and broke into the elderly woman's home by throwing a concrete block through the window. He tied her up and strangled her to death with a pair of pantyhose before hiding the body under a bridge and returning to the campsite like nothing had happened. Whether he felt like his luck would run out or that he was getting too old to keep killing, Raider decided that his killing spree must come to an end.
Before we go further, yeah, he definitely progressed over time, bolder and bolder. I mean, definitely an example of somebody who either became more obsessed with their urges or felt growing confidence as time went by with not being caught, or became caring less and less about being caught in, a cost-benefit analysis of getting to do what he wanted to do. Let's move on to 1991. Heard nothing about it that I recall.
Come to an end. By 2004, the investigation of the BTK killer had gone ice cold. That is when Raider foolishly tried to send a letter to the police, claiming responsibility for a killing that hadn't been previously linked to him. This ignited interest in the case once again and led the police to taking DNA tests from hundreds of men in an attempt to track down the BTK killer. In fact, despite 1,100 DNA samples being taken overall, they failed to identify Dennis Rader.
Well, that's one of those things is, unless they have a reason to have it already on file, especially back in the day, there wouldn't be anything to compare it to. I mean, you run it in hopes, but if you've never been caught for anything, or you've never had a job where it was required, or something similar, you get away with it.
Raider eventually sent the police a message on a floppy disk, who quickly checked the metadata of the Microsoft Word document. In this data, they found that the document had been made by a man who called himself Dennis. They also found mention of the Lutheran Church. From that moment, it was down to a simple Google search of Lutheran Church, Wichita, Dennis, which gave the result of a man named Dennis Rader, the president of the Congregation's Council. At this point, the police already knew that the BTK killer drove a black Jeep Cherokee, the very same type of car parked outside the house of Dennis Rader. Now, you may think that that's the end of our story, but things weren't that simple. Even though the police suspected Rader, they only had strong circumstantial evidence and needed more direct evidence to lock him up. The way they solved this was by controversially obtaining a warrant to test the DNA of a pap smear from Rader's daughter that had been taken at the University of Kansas's medical clinic when she was a student there. The DNA of the pap smear was a near match to the.
I had so many questions there. Controversial warrant, yeah, that's a phrasing. Um, there's. I can only speak for more modern times. I can't speak for then. I was a teenager back in the day. But just what's mentioned here, I would assume the police had a bit more. But just with what was mentioned here, there seems more to get a warrant for his DNA than to get his daughters in the first place. Second, from a pap smear history. That was just weird. Why? And as much as we're made to think differently by modern shows, circumstantial evidence is highly what cases tend to depend upon. So it's not as though that's not a reason to get a direct DNA sample. Especially when it's enough to get a daughter's pap smear DNA sample, because that's going a lot of steps further. That is just so weird. Controversial warrant, yeah, that's a phrasing. That is really weird.
When she was a student there. The DNA of the pap smear was a near match to the DNA found under one of the victim's fingernails. This was finally the evidence they needed to arrest a serial killer who had evaded the law for 30 long years. After being questioned, Dennis confessed to being the BTK killer, sharing every gruesome detail of the killings. He even gave detectives the locations of his hidey holes where he stashed his mementos. Among the things found were photographs of Raider dressed up in the clothing of his victims, posing in bondage positions. Investigators believe that he did this to relive the ecstasy of the murders and to put himself in the mindset of his victims. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder and received the maximum sentence of 10 consecutive life terms. He is currently locked up at the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility near Wichita, where he is being held in solitary confinement for his own safety. The man who thought it was his right to enter any home he pleased, to take the lives of innocent people, is now only allowed out of his 80-square-foot cell for 1 hour, 5 times a week. It makes me wonder if Rader would have gotten away with brutally killing his 10 victims if he didn't feel the need to satisfy his own ego by sending letters and hints of his crimes. It is likely he would have carried on being the good husband, the good father, the devoted churchgoer, but above all that, at the very core of his being, he would have continued to be the embodiment of evil, prepared to scratch that perverted itch at any given moment. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Dennis Rader. So why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.
Yeah, definitely someone who was upping the stakes and didn't mind the fact that he was caught, really. Either that or just plain accepting reality that he had been, and why effing bother pretending otherwise. One or the other, but it seems he was one of the attention seekers, you know? And, you know, like so many others, I mean, you see it over and over and over and over and over and over. people that live those dual lives, they seem, they have those roles where they're a normal, pleasant, maybe odd, maybe normal, just person on the street, family member, you know, and then they've got that other side to them. And you see that with everything from brutal murderers to, abusive partners to, various levels of, criminal that's, non-violent, but people with addictions that they're able to, keep from loved ones and family and stuff, where they keep that separate life going. Where you just, as much as you may think you know someone, you can just never be 100% in the mind of another person. You can't. And, I've said so all my life that, you know, that is the case. And I, ironically, ended up in a situation similar myself. I won't go into a big, long, detailed thing, but I did end up married for more than 15 years to a person who never existed. Yeah, I was married to a sociopath who's, as far as I know, I'm the only person who ever met him. I watched him after he had did things and showed me himself. I watched him time and time and time again put on that false personality that had been there for that decade and a half, and since childhood, he said, to his family, to people who thought he was friends that, we would see, to his co-workers, to his children, and then once he was off the phone or once they were out of the room, that persona was gone. And there are people to this day that knew us both, that were close with me or close to us both, that just can't believe it, because it's just such a weird thing to wrap your head around. And you see that, with abusers, that, people are like, oh, well, they're nice to me. That doesn't mean that's all of who they are, And, and that's why it's so hard for so many abuse victims to get free, is part of that stigma of, but they're such a nice person, and then you have these extreme cases where just horrific, and can be a devoted father, devoted spouse, churchgoer. You can never know really fully the mind of another person, as much as we'd like to believe otherwise. And, in this case, when it came down to it, an attention-seeking, horrific human. Wow. But yeah, so that was interesting. Still can't get over that weird warrant. Weird warrant. But it ended up doing what it was supposed to do, so hey, oh boy. But that's that. Please visit their actual channel to watch the whole thing without, my constant breaking up commentary, and their other, many different videos. The link will be below. And take care, y'all. Be safe.